Hello, bonjour, hola, salam alaikum, jumbo, tanastalin, dumela, salama, mulibwanji, howdy body, sawubona, mulishani, gunjan, hola, salam.
My name is Kintwani Mwase, and the next episode is Start Something with Petra Baptiste.
I guess the positives are really understanding a culture or starting to understand a culture. You know, we think that where we live is perfect and that we can't do any wrong where we're from, blah, blah, blah. But then you go somewhere else and you say, wow, there's a completely different way of doing things. And it works over there, you know? And then you look back at home and you're like, wait a second, why don't we do that?
Good morning, good day, or good evening, and welcome to 54 Lights. This show is meant to shed light on undertold stories out of Africa. Our vision is to introduce you to some extraordinary people doing incredible things.
I'm Petra Adrienne Baptiste. Petra is Greek, actually, and it means rock or stone. And my dad liked the name, and my mom liked Adrienne. And Adrienne spelled Adrienne, or in French, Adrienne, I believe means dark beauty.
I've known Petra for decades. We met in Montreal and worked somewhat side by side before she mysteriously disappeared. Well, not literally, of course, but she did move. And not just down the 401 either. She went to teach English in Japan. At the time, and up until recently actually, I had no idea what would possess someone to pick up and pack up, to fly across the globe and teach English in a foreign land. What would possess someone to leave all they know, all the comforts of home, and find themselves in a new and otherwise lonely place? Now, don't get me wrong. Japan is not cold or lonely, but any place that's foreign and that far away from home has got to be a little bit lonely. But rather than shrink, she's thrived, built a community, a network, and an otherwise amazing life. She now teaches in Abu Dhabi after 10 years in Japan. She's a corporate trainer, among other things, and celebrates her culture through an organization called Carifik. It highlights Afro-Caribbean culture. She's driven, brave, and a great representation of her rich heritage. Here, in part, is our conversation.
So I have two brothers, Sean and Shane, and we have a sister, and her name is Krista. So basically, it's 4 kids.
4 kids. Okay. If I were to ask them, I think siblings is an interesting perspective, so I'm going to stick there. If I were to ask them whether or not Petra, like the rock and dark beauty, is a good fit for your name, what do you think they'd say?
I think they'd agree. Because I can be quite stubborn.
Okay.
But I don't. But also, I look at it as a positive, and maybe they would see this too when they're not trying to make fun of me. So, they probably say that, yes, as a rocks could move also. Yeah. They withstand a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
So, in the same respect for yourself, when you look at that, I don't know if you've ever thought of it, but do you see yourself as a rock? You're obviously beautiful, but I mean, do you see yourself as that, and have you always felt that way?
No, I haven't. So thinking of the positives of rock is actually very recent. I would say maybe in the past year or two. Because I work in Abu Dhabi, and my students, they have very interesting names that are related generally, not always, but generally related to religion. And they asked me what my name meant because they know it in Arabic as Petra, which is rock, but it's also basically the name of the city in Jordan. Mm-hmm. So they're like, what? Like, how are you named after rock, miss? Like, so I had to try and come up quickly with something positive to describe myself. And then they were impressed. So I was like, okay, let me run with this. So that's kind of how I see it. I guess when I was younger, I didn't like my name because I went to a predominantly Greek high school in Montreal. And it's a Greek name. It just means rock. Yeah. And I used to be called Rockhead, just Rock. What's the other one? Because of the gas station Petro Canada, I was Petra Canada.
Creative.
And I didn't really know many Petras. Yeah, creative. Yeah. So I just was like, this is a really annoying name. But funny. I kind of liked it. Deep down, I know I liked it because I just thought it sounded nice. But yeah, that's it. But yeah, I now appreciate my name.
You mentioned that you're a teacher in Abu Dhabi, but let's take maybe a couple steps back.
Yeah.
What have you been up to? What have you been doing?
Wow. Okay. Well,
you left Montreal
way back at the bank.
Yeah.
I had one of my childhood friends tell me that she had gone to Japan to teach English. And I was like, Japan? Like, why? So she told me the salary, and I was like, oh, okay. So at that time, it was pretty good, compared to what we were making at the bank. And I was like, okay, I don't know anything about Japan. Like, I wasn't into anime back then or any of that. I knew where Japan was. I knew they spoke Japanese. I knew they weren't Chinese, and that's it. Not much more. So I applied, and I remember crying on the plane as I was going there and thinking that I was crazy. And this was back in the day. This was before internet, like say high-speed internet was cheap. So I didn't have an internet connection. I was using phone cards, and basic. I would go to the internet cafe once a week to check my emails.
Right. Once a week.
Yes.
Wow. And look now we're doing a WhatsApp call like a half a world away.
Basically, exactly. So Japan, that was the first year I was there. It was awkward for me.
So that's pretty intense to go. You weren't going to Europe, which is not to say that Europe is better than Japan, but I'm just saying it's closer in proximity. So
true.
So how did your family react before you go on? I just want to know, how did your family react to this? Because knowing you, I was a little like, oh, Japan, like that's far.
Right. I remember my dad, he passed away. My late father, he was all for it. He was like, yes. He's like, we're going to visit you.
Wow. Okay.
So he's like, go anywhere, and we'll visit you. And yeah, he was like totally fine with it. And my mom, she was a complete opposite. She was like, nah, like, why Japan?
Yeah.
Why so far? Why for a year? This, she's like, I understand, you want to travel. She goes, that's fine. But like living, so I don't think she really said no, but she was just not feeling it at all. But again, they wished me well, and they did come to see me. They did visit me in the first 6 months I was there.
Wow.
They visited me.
Okay.
And they loved it.
Really?
Oh, yeah, they loved it. And my mother even went back.
How long were you there?
So I was there, the first time I was there was 15 months. Then I went back to Montreal. I said, okay, I'm done. Like, I'm done traveling, living, whatever around the world. And I got the itch again. So I stayed at the bank another maybe year and a half. And then I said, I need to go back to Japan. Something was calling me back to Japan. I honestly don't know what. Wow.
And then so if I fast forward, so you've been to Japan and now you're in Abu Dhabi?
Well, yes. I would say that in 2011 was a very difficult year. First of all, the earthquake and tsunami had hit in March.
Yeah.
And where I was in Tokyo was affected by the earthquake. So we weren't affected by the tsunami directly. However, emotionally, it was extremely traumatic. And I guess if they say people have PTSD, yeah, I had a little bit of that. I think a lot of people, like everyone, was affected emotionally by it, especially on the eastern coast of Japan. And that made me consider going back home. But I hadn't at that point. But it was just two other personal issues that had happened at home. One of them being my father's illness. Right. Made me go back home to spend time with him. But I was still kind of connected to Japan. And after he passed, I went back to Japan just to see, just to see if I was going to stay or not. So I didn't end up staying much longer. That kind of pushed me to go back home, to kind of say I want to be home with family, see what happens, and try something else. And while I was home, I was trying to really figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I had been interested in the Middle East while I was in Japan, but I kind of put it off for a while because things were just going well. So in that time, I was doing some tours to Trinidad and Tobago for Japanese people. And I also targeted some Americans. So I had some small tours going to Trinidad and Tobago for Carnival. And then an opportunity came for working in the Middle East. So I answered some ads and I got interviews and I decided on Abu Dhabi. And I've been there for the past almost 5 years.
Okay, that's amazing. I've got as a sidebar. So as a profession, you are a teacher. Is that?
Yes.
Is that? So you're crazy. No, I mean,
it's so
that's
weird
great.
to say it, but I am.
Okay, so you're a teacher. What ages are you?
Yes.
What ages are you teaching?
I'm teaching high school right now. So that's, let's say, from 12 to 17.
Okay. I'm going to ask me just an ignorant question, but a curious one. A Black woman is coming in to first a Japanese culture and then second to a Middle Eastern culture and is taking on a position of authority. You're the classroom teacher. Like, I don't know the dynamic. So can you, how is that dynamic? Let's put it that way.
It's very interesting. While I was in Japan, I was teaching adults, actually.
Okay.
So the job that I held the longest, so say for about 8.5 years or so, my title was a corporate trainer. So my job was to teach office people. It could be managers, it could be secretaries, it could be, the board, it could be like CEOs, all kinds of people in companies, in corporate settings, how to conduct themselves in an international environment where English is spoken. So it wasn't necessarily like I was in a classroom.
Okay.
I would go to people's offices and they would have lessons with me during their break. If they had lunch break, or if it was after hours, or maybe sometimes before they started their work.
Yeah.
So it depended on the specific client. Sometimes there were smaller group classes, which were sometimes very awkward for them because they'd be with their boss.
Yeah.
But most of the time it was one-on-one, one-to-one.
Did you feel that you were... Did you feel that you were were you embraced in that role? Because I mean that's a different dynamic because you're going into a corporate culture.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like I could imagine.
It was amazing. It was amazing, actually. Most of the time, it was. I would say the most challenging times were when I was teaching men who probably thought they were much older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Apparently, I don't look that old. Mm-hmm. But I was teaching people who were about the same age as me, but they somehow thought I was much younger, and they couldn't figure out why I was teaching them. Like, where's my experience?
Yeah,
and all this?
Yeah.
Like, and the other thing is that the people who were clearly older than me, sometimes, especially men, they had a hard time at first, thinking that I was there to teach them their job and all this stuff.
Right.
So I made it very clear that I'm just here to help you with how to convey messages in English. It was quite a fun, I would say, definitely more fun than I expected, in the sense that, yes, I was actually worried sometimes, like, wow, I'm in Japan in this culture that's very strict.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're having these lessons, again, it wasn't like one lesson here, one lesson there. Like these would be contracts that might last maybe 6 months at a time.
Yeah.
Some might last, a month. Some would be reoccurring. So the longest clients I had were 5 years, 6 years, seeing the same person weekly. Like I would say there is one of my clients who I still talk to. I consider him like my uncle.
Yeah. It's got to be. Yeah.
Seriously.
At that level of involvement, you build a relationship.
Yes. Definitely.
So
did
you have any formal training in that respect? Mm. Or were you just sort of figuring it out as you went along?
Well, this is the thing. So I don't know how teaching is now in Japan, but when I had applied back then, what they were looking for were people who had an undergraduate degree in any subject, right? So I have an undergraduate degree in cell and molecular biology, and I had the work experience at the bank, right? Yeah. So they saw that, and that was fine. While I was in Japan, I think I mentioned before that I was kind of thinking about teaching the Middle East. Mm-hmm. So I decided that I wanted to do something called a CELTA, which is a Cambridge University certificate that basically trains you on how to deliver, lessons to adult learners of English. So I took that, and that helped with getting jobs in the Middle East.
So what compels a person to pick up, pack up, and move to foreign soil? One can only assume that it takes a very unique DNA type, and an even more unique set of skills just to imagine it. I spoke to Troy Pedden while I searched for some answers. Troy is the founder of Go Abroad and a prominent voice in the field. His organization is at the forefront of both study and teaching abroad. Troy's vision and mission is an interesting one, especially given his background and beginnings. Here, in part, is our conversation.
Please stay on the line while your call is completed. Long-distance charges may apply.
Good morning.
Good morning, Troy. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Not bad, thank you. Not bad. Can you give me your full name and where your family's from?
So my full name is Troy Pedden. I was born in South Dakota and grew up in a small farming town in rural Illinois.
Can you tell me about Go Abroad? What that organization is and your I guess your mission with it.
So I was the study abroad coordinator at the University of Colorado at Denver 25 years ago. I was the first one. They had just opened an office. And so, before that, students sort of, if they were to go abroad, they did it on their own, or occasionally a faculty would take a group of students abroad. The year that we started Go Abroad, 1997, I was in a PhD program, and I became aware of the internet. That same year, Council Travel, which was a subsidiary of CIEE, got out of the publishing business. And prior to that, they had published these sort of guidebooks. And pre-internet, if a student wanted to go abroad or study abroad, they'd come into their international education office or to their advisor. They'd look through these books. Then they'd make a phone call or mail out a letter or wait for a paper application to come in the mail. So the timing of the Council Travel stopping publishing these directories and the advent of the internet was just an incredible window, and we created that site. We're now 22 years old, and we have 1.5 million users every month. It's got a pretty big impact.
That footprint now, if you can give me some scope of where those, you say those users, those are all or primarily students from the United States who are wishing to go abroad and to teach and to study, or
to teach or to study or to internship or to volunteer. Mm-hmm. It's our broad category is meaningful travel, sustainable travel, meaningful, immersive, cultural travel.
I got sort of like maybe one or two last questions for you, Troy. One is a little bit more specific about what you had mentioned about the, your typical 30-something-year-old female as being sort of like a big demographic. Can you describe to me in your words what's the DNA of the people that are walking through your doors, figuratively, of course, to enter into these programs? I'm thinking specifically from a teaching perspective, but feel free to answer just in general. Like, what does that person look like, and what are they looking for? Yeah.
So it's hard to describe, and it's dangerous to categorize people based on their history and so on. But what I'll tell you is when I visit inbound freshmen, university freshmen, and I ask them who intends on studying abroad, it'll be 90% or more intend on studying abroad. So, this generation wants to go abroad, and they want to do something meaningful. And I'm quite hopeful because it feels like this generation is more connected to experiences over material things than maybe since the 60s or something.
Yeah.
So the interest is there for everyone. Now, who ends up going? You do have people who are really tuned into other cultures. So those people will often be the ones who go. But I think you also get people who are just, frustrated with their track, the typical track in life, or they start a job and they feel like it's unfulfilling and they want to do something more meaningful. And once people do go abroad, especially when they're going to do something like volunteering abroad, or where they're really immersed in the culture, they typically will do that for the rest of their life. It won't be a one-time thing. They'll be back. They'll stay connected to those communities for the rest of their lives. But all of these things tell you how important it is that we need to get everyone abroad.
Yeah.
People need to have this experience, and including farmers' sons and daughters, and kids from lower income, and kids in the inner city, and everybody needs this experience. And it's these experiences that keep us connected and create empathy and compassion for our fellow human beings.
Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for inviting me.
So my name is Christine Dosty, and I'm originally from Rochester, New York, and now living in Whitby, Ontario.
Take me back to the decision that went into you teaching. Where did you teach, first of all? And then what went into the decision for you to move to that destination and teach there?
Mm-hmm. It's 2002, I guess, before I left, and I was working as a paralegal in a law firm in Rochester, New York, and I had never been on a plane before, and I was 27 at the time, and I thought, how can this be that I've never been on a plane? So I went for a 5-week backpacking trip by myself in Europe, and that was just sparked a whole new interest in me and curiosity in the world, and I couldn't think of anything else except how can I do this again but get paid for it. And so after a long time researching when I probably should have been doing actual work, I kept discovering places like Thailand, China, Korea would come up, and they would pay your airfare, they would pay for a year of teaching, like housing, and it was a decent salary. Korea is what I landed on, and my initial thinking was, well, I can do anything for a year. So,
when you broached the subject to your family, what was the reception?
Not good. They thought that I was a little bit of a lunatic when I went to Europe by myself for 5 weeks. My mother had horrible images of I'd be dead in a ditch, I'd get robbed, this and that. And so to leave for a year, they could not understand. No, why did it have to be in Korea? I didn't know anything about Korea. I couldn't speak the language. That how could I possibly do this? This is ridiculous. And only one person, my dad, sat through all of that and just said, you know what? Go. Why wouldn't you go? Well, you only get one life, too. I mean, what are you going to do?
How long were you there for?
Ultimately, I was there for 4 years. When I first got there, it was shortly after 9/11, right? So it was 2002. By 2003, I went in September, and it was still shaky over there. There were a lot of U.S. military, and something had happened right before I arrived where a tank had accidentally killed 2 young Korean girls. And so there was a lot of anti-Americanism that was happening while I was there, and that was intimidating. So about 8 months into it, I thought, well, this is it. I did my year. It was fun, and I'll go back home. But then I took a trip to meet a friend of mine, and on the way home on the train, I met a French-Canadian man that led ultimately to hanging around a little longer and switched jobs and moved to cities closer to each other, and we ended up staying another 3.5 years together.
Wow.
And now, that I'm married to him and we have 2 kids. So
right.
It worked out okay.
If I was to say you got to pick one thing, one highlight or low light, like aside from meeting your husband, what would you answer?
It'd be difficult to narrow it to one. So I started off at what they call a hagwon, which is an after-school program, and it was from 2 p.m. to 8 at night, and I got kids that were little kids up to high school kids, and that was fun. We basically played games so they can learn English. When I moved to a university because I have a master's degree, and that became a whole other level of teaching. And I was also teaching adults and adult education in private. And so I liked the variety of being able to teach at the different levels. And when you teach at the university, you also have pretty good time off from teaching,
Yep.
which facilitated a lot of traveling in Asia, which probably was what helped stay the longest. But everybody was always eager to learn. They wanted to learn English. They asked really fun questions. It was just a lot of having fun with the language.
Very cool.
And exploring it, through the culture. And they would try to teach me Korean, and I would teach them English, and so that was definitely a highlight.
You seem to be very proud of your Caribbean heritage. You celebrate it, you live it, you embody it. Tell me about now Petra making her footprint, all over the world, it seems.
So, so basically what had happened was in 2009, I had the opportunity to go to Ghana because I have some Ghanaian friends in Japan. And they had always talked about Ghana. They said, Petra, whenever you have the chance, come to Ghana.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. And at that point, one of my friends was going. She was going to be there. So she said, make your plans and, we'll meet up and I'll, take you around everything. So that was my first trip to the motherland. First time. And I'm telling you, to this day, like, it's earth-shattering. Like, it hit me that, wow. So all the stories that my family has talked about, or that we hear about, slavery, about being pulled away from the African continent, the food, the music. I was like, wait a minute, this is similar to what we have what my parents cook, what my grandparents cook. It's similar. And this is only one country. This is only Ghana, So I felt this really powerful connection to Ghana. And I made a deal with some women at one of the markets at the art center in Accra to buy shea butter, to buy black soap, and to buy jewelry and sell it in Japan. I didn't realize this at the time, but my father had just been diagnosed with cancer. And that was they told me when I was in Ghana. So somehow, in looking back, I realized that the other part of my entrepreneurial side was called Tokyo Trinbago. Trinbago was Trinidad and Tobago. And I wanted to be able to be closer to that side of me. At that point, I didn't say, oh, yeah, it's because my father has cancer that I'm going to do this.
In hindsight,
but looking back, you're right, in hindsight, definitely, it was that. So that's why I said, okay, I need people to understand that. Like, some people would ask me, well, why did you promote Ghanaian stuff? I'm like, well, because that could be part of my history.
Yeah, of course.
Likely that my ancestors came from somewhere on that coast.
Yeah.
So, yes. And I'd visited, and so I said, okay. And then with the Trinidadian side, I was like, I love carnival. I love music. I love soca music. I love the food. I said, I want people to know about it. So it just kind of kept going. I just step by step. And I was the first, I guess, non-Japanese person in Japan to have what they call a band launch. And that is something that happens before Carnival, where new costumes come out and it's like a fashion show, food, events, music. So I had that in 2010. So, wow, that's years ago. So that one was called, I can't remember what the event was called. It was called Trinidad Carnival Tokyo. Yes, it was in October, I remember. And it took me a few months to do it. And I got a band, Ronnie and Carol, from Trinidad. So Ronnie McIntosh came to Japan, and we had the event. And it was nice. It was big. It was successful. So I did that.
Yeah.
And then after that, it was just, I did a lot more cooking classes. I was on TV in Japan. It's just weird, like, looking back at all that. But that country, like, gave me the push, kind of show off my culture.
Why teach?
Why teach? Because it pushes my curiosity. It makes me want to learn more so that I don't get embarrassed.
What is it about your culture that you love the most and you celebrate the most?
I like to celebrate the mixture of cultures. It shows up in the food, it shows up in how people look. So by looking at someone, you can't tell that, oh, they're from the Caribbean. They could be from anywhere. And the idea that we are very hardworking people. And a lot of immigrants over the years, left the Caribbean, moved all over the world, and have this strong, work ethic, and expect that their children will do very well. It's very important that people understand that they can't stereotype the Caribbean in general, and they can't stereotype each of the Caribbean countries.
So there you have it. The conversation continues. I'd like to thank all my guests for their participation and candor. If you could go anywhere, and you've traveled a lot now, but if you could go anywhere for 2 weeks, vacation, where are you going?
Wow. I haven't been to Bali.
And I'm sighing because I know you will go there, and I'm like dying to go to Bali. I'm dying to go to Bali. Remember, you can find us wherever you do your listening. iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or even YouTube. Just search for 54 Lights. Listen, like, share. In the movie about your life, in the biopic, who plays Petra? Who's the lead?
Gabrielle Union.
Gabrielle Union. That's amazing. It's funny. I was just talking about her yesterday. So that's a great pick.
Hello, English-speaking countries. Bonjour, French-speaking countries. Hola, Portuguese-speaking countries. Salam alaikum, Arabic-speaking countries. Jambo, Swahili-speaking countries. Tanastalin, Ethiopia's Amharic. Mulibwanji, Malawi's Chichewa. Howdy Body, Sierra Leone's Creole. Sawubona, South Africa's Zulu. Mulishani, Zambia's Bemba. Gunjani, Zimbabwe's Ndebele. Hola, Equatorial Guinea's Spanish. Salam, Eritrea's Tigrinya.
Music for this episode was composed, enjoyed, and used with permission by Anjo. Until we meet again. Thanks for listening.